only $49.99 per month. Call 855-581-6858 today. Spectrum Business, made to work.
You are loved. You are valued. You are resilient. You got this.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Good evening, I'm Errol Lewis, and you are watching Spectrum News coverage of the Republican National Convention. It is 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 on the West Coast, and 7 p.m. in Milwaukee, where the Republican Convention is in day 2, and they are underway. The theme tonight is Make America Safe Once Again. A number of high-profile Republicans and former presidential candidates will be addressing the delegates over the next couple of hours, and we're going to bring a lot of them to you. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley will be speaking. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will be speaking. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders will be there, as well as former HUD Secretary Ben Carson, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, who's also co-chair of the Republican National Committee. She'll be the keynote speaker tonight. Let me bring in Spectrum News national political reporter Taylor Popolars, who is live at the Fiserv. Expect to hear from these speakers tonight.
Well, Errol, as you mentioned, the theme this evening is Make America Safe Again, and the Trump campaign has emphasized that they want to talk about the U.S.-Mexico border, they want to talk about crime in American cities, and they want to talk about attacks on law enforcement. Now, it's worth pointing out, just a quick fact check on things, that it was a few weeks ago that President Joe Biden signed some pretty intense executive orders having to do with the border and tightening asylum laws, and U.S. Customs and Border Patrol has released data showing in June there's been a double-digit percentage decrease in illegal border crossings, and we have recent data from the government showing that crime in American cities over the last year has also decreased as well. But delegates and lawmakers that we've spoken with say they want to emphasize that the Republican Party's vision for the border and for safety, they think still beats out what President Biden and the Democrats have been able to do. So we expect to hear that from a lot of the speakers. And we've actually been hearing from a lot of the Republican Senate candidates, both incumbent senators running for re-election and a candidate first time on those points too, as they try to help out their own re-election bids, but also boost up Donald Trump.
And Taylor, are there particular policies or laws or adjustments that we can expect the convention to be discussing tonight?
Yes, on the border, Trump has made very clear, he says it in every single one of his campaign rallies, that he wants to, if he gets back into the White House, he wants to oversee the largest deportation operation in American history, and he wants to use every lever of the federal government to deport everybody who is in this country illegally right now, which I believe the latest numbers are over 11 million people. And when it comes to crime in cities, Trump has said he wants to use the U.S. military to go into cities that he, as president, would deem are out of control and need support that their local police cannot help with. So that's something that is in kind of the Trump campaign platform. It's mentioned a lot by a lot of the speakers here, and it's something that the former president says in every single one of his campaign events.
Let me bring in the rest of our panel to talk about tonight's theme, Make America Safe Once Again. We've got Spectrum News anchor and chief national political reporter Josh Robin, as well as political anchors Holly Gregory in Florida, Tim Boyum in North Carolina, Alex Cohen in California, Jason Fechner right there in Wisconsin. And Josh, there's no bigger safety issue at the top of many people's minds right now than the assassination attempt on Donald Trump just a few days ago. What's your sense of how that's going to become part of the discussion here?
I think it's still TBD when it comes to the tone that the former president might take. And I'm really anxious to hear his speech. We have to wait a couple of days, but we have to see whether it has changed him in significant ways after living almost 80 years, whether this has changed him into someone who is more conciliatory, less vindictive, less looking to trample his opponents than work with them. He certainly has done, I mean, just in a little while, we're going to hear from Nikki Haley, who only a few weeks ago was saying that she wasn't not only going to come to the convention, but we weren't even sure if she was going to endorse Trump. She ultimately did endorse Trump, and she ultimately is going to be speaking tonight. So I want to see what kind of existential effect it's had on him. I can say for sure that people here are very, very taken with what happened with him. They're not calling for any kind, I haven't heard, let me say, any kind of the vengeance that we saw in the moments afterwards when some of his supporters came and chanted at the media that it was our fault. I haven't really heard people blaming Biden as his running mate did, J.D. Vance, in the moments after the assassination. What people are saying is that in many cases, people believe this was some kind of divine intervention, really divine, that the former president wasn't assassinated. And so it's very much colored it. There's even in one situation, it's a little bit comical, but perhaps touching as well. One person actually put white tape over his ear here to kind of emulate Trump. That's definitely the exception. What people are saying is that they're extremely happy that he is here, that he's accepting this nomination on Thursday.
That would be a very interesting fashion statement if everyone began to tape out their ears. And Holly Gregory, the former president did suggest that there'd be some changes in his approach. We won't know for sure until he actually takes the stage later this week. But what's your sense of what kind of, I guess, alteration or change of course or even tone that we might see from Donald Trump?
Well, I can tell you what we heard from Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, who was with him last night. They were backstage before Trump made that entrance with the bandage on his ear. The first time anyone had seen him in person, for him to come 2 days after that assassination attempt. And Congressman Donalds explained what it was like to stand backstage as Lee Greenwood was, singing God Bless America. And he was standing next to Trump, and he said Trump was very emotional, and he felt like there was a difference. He couldn't quite, put his finger on what had changed, but there was a different look in his eye, and that he described it as being grateful, as having a new resolve, and as wanting to unite this country. And I think other people described it that way as well once they saw him when he came out and he sat out in the audience, and as the song finished up and you watched him look around, and he did sort of have this different look in his eye. And Donald Trump Jr. explained that in an interview as well, that he felt like there has been a change. And Donald said that Trump told him that he had turned his head to look at the prompter. And it was just, a totally different story, that he sees the hand of God in this is what Donalds was saying, and we've heard Trump say that as well. So, if you literally come within an inch of your life, it's going to impact anyone. So I think that we will see a change in Donald Trump, and I think you could, see that in his eyes last night.
Okay, we will in fact be taking that when it does happen. That's going to be later in the week. Let me go back to Taylor. You spoke with the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Jim Jordan is there at the convention, and you spoke with him about congressional action into this shooting. There were some questions being raised about the federal government's response and all of this. What did he tell you?
Yeah, this was interesting to talk to the congressman. This is the Ohio congressman, as you mentioned, chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He actually mentioned to me when the House is going to be back in session next week, the Judiciary Committee has a pre-scheduled hearing with FBI Director Christopher Wray, so it'll be a major topic of conversation. But Jordan is really questioning how the agency, meaning the FBI, is going to be able to investigate this. Here's part of what he told me.
There's, I think, a fundamental concern Americans have, and I think the burden is on the FBI to demonstrate that they can actually do this. I have real concerns about their ability to do this in a way that is going to get the real answers for the American people.
And so that obviously shows kind of the GOP's broader skepticism, if you will, of different aspects of the federal government, a charge that Donald Trump has led. But now that this tragedy happened last week and one of Trump's rally attendees was killed, a couple others were injured, the former president was, of course, injured, there's now renewed focus from House Republicans. They're talking about either issuing subpoenas or having Secret Service officials come in to voluntarily testify. They want kind of a whole-of-government review as to how the Secret Service failed at protecting all the rally-goers and the former president himself. So there's going to be a lot of congressional action, and Jordan indicated that this is really only just the beginning.
Okay, thank you for that, Taylor. Now, Alex, you live in a state where border concerns are often or always present. What are voters saying about the migrant situation, and what are the Republicans gathered here tonight expected to do to address those concerns?
Well, Errol, there was a real mixture of emotions, opinions, and attitudes about immigrants and immigration here in California and many of our border states. We actually got a preview from Donald Trump's team today in terms of some of the cases that are likely to be highlighted throughout the evening tonight. A number of instances where immigrants who came into this country without the proper documentation went on to commit crimes, some of them very serious crimes, and of course, we've seen several instances where lives were taken. A safe bet to say tonight the blame for those crimes will be put squarely in the lap of President Biden. And I think it's also really important to note that President Biden has taken some very stiff, stern attitudes towards immigration, which has upset some of the more progressive Democrats. California's own Senator Alex Padilla was not on board with some of the changes that he made. And yet we just learned this week that with these new policies in place, that illegal border crossings are at their lowest in the past month that they've been throughout President Biden's term. People here, some are looking for much stricter immigration reform, to be sure. Others point out to the fact that immigrants often take up the jobs that many others in this country don't want to take up, and remind people that when it comes to themes like safety, many of these people are fleeing incredibly dangerous situations. Yes, there are some who do commit crimes. Particularly, it has not at all been proven that this is anything beyond a very small minority.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. Our Rena Diamante is on the floor of the convention speaking with delegates. Who have you been speaking with tonight, Rena?
Well, I've been hanging out by the Texas delegation. Of course, they have their Texas energy and their Texas pride with a lot of their cowboy hats here. And with tonight's theme of Make America Safe Again, this is really a theme that resonates with a lot of Texans and Republicans really across the country when it comes to supporting law enforcement, when it comes to cracking down on crime, and addressing some of the border security issues that we know is a top issue for former President Trump and his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance. I do want to bring in Jenny Salinas of San Antonio. We were just chatting. She's a delegate from Texas. You know, a lot of Democratic mayors of these cities are saying, in the wake of the pandemic, but it doesn't sound like that's what you've been feeling in San Antonio.
No, because of the bail reform. So if they're doing crimes in our city, they're gonna go to jail and they're gonna be let out, and that gives them a little bit more incentive to go out there and keep on committing crimes, because they know that they're gonna go through the system and they're not gonna be any bail, and they're gonna be able to come out. And that's happening in cities like Austin as well. It's happening in border cities. Some of these cities that are ran by Democrats want to defund the police, so you're losing funding to the police, which is causing a smaller police force to police our communities. So that is a big problem.
And we just chatted about some of your support for former President Trump's policies and his promises when it comes to border security. You said that you agree with his plan for executing mass deportation. Certainly there are millions of undocumented immigrants living in this country. A lot of them are concerned about maybe deporting those people who've been in the country for a long time.
Well, we were talking about this before. I want President Trump to focus on the almost 20 million illegals that came here under Joe Biden illegally. If they wanted to seek asylum, they could have gone through the port of entry, and they didn't. And that is a very big burden on our taxpayers. We're all going to have to be paying more money in food, more money in costs in our communities, because we're housing the illegals in our communities. They're getting free food, free health care. They're getting housing. I want free food. I want free health care. I would like housing. I think some of our young kids would, or our veterans, or our homeless people. But we're instead giving some of those resources, moving them over. There are schools that have shut down just to make room for all of the illegals to have a migrant camp. So I think we're going to put our citizens first, mass deportation of all the illegals that came in under Joe Biden. If they want to come here, they should do it legally through the port of entry.
From San Antonio, thanks so much for chatting with us. And so that's what we've been hearing a lot from the Republican delegation in Texas, certainly in support of a number of former President Trump's policies. They would like to see a return of the Remain in Mexico policy. Of course, that is very difficult to implement because that does require Mexico's buy-in to take a part of it. And they also want to end They want to put those restrictions on asylum. We know that President Joe Biden enacted those restrictions at the southern border, and we've seen a decrease in those crossings between ports of entry, but a lot of these Republican delegates are saying that's a little bit too late. Errol.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rena. Let me go to Jason Fechner. Is immigration a big concern for voters right there in Wisconsin?
Immigration definitely a big concern throughout a lot of the Rust Belt communities. Polls have shown across the country it's one of, if not the top issue for many. A big issue for many people here throughout the Midwest is the economy. And you go back to the old James Carville famous quote, "It's the economy, stupid," that can basically impact an election going forward. And some very interesting data has come out over the last few months now from Bloomberg. It's called their Economic Misery Index. And sounds like a really fun study, but basically it shows that Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all of these states where Biden is underwater after winning there in 2020, those are the states that, based on the inflation rate out there and unemployment as well, he is struggling because of the economy especially. Yes, he is struggling about immigration, but politics is so much about the optics, so much about perception, and so much about the data that both Republicans and Democrats believe. On crime alone, Biden and Trump have gone back and forth on whether or not crime is actually down in this country. Biden pointing toward FBI crime data showing that a drop in homicides by 26%. Trump, though, pointing at the crime victimization survey. That shows that crime is up by 46%, violent crime, homicides. That data, though, goes back to 2022. And when confronted with the newer data, a lot of Republicans say that Biden and the administration are cooking the books. So a lot of this is about the data, about the numbers, who you believe, what you believe. Obviously, for Republicans behind me at Pfizer Forum tonight, they are going to believe what is said from the podium throughout the rest of the evening and the rest of the week here with the RNC.
Okay, well, you know, Jason, while we're talking about crime, I understand that just today, outside of the security perimeter at the convention, there was a shooting. We're reporting that Ohio police officers killed a man. What happened with that, and how do people see crime in the city of Milwaukee right now?
Well, hundreds of police officers, of course, from across the country, different departments across the country are here in Milwaukee, kind of a unified task force with Milwaukee police. And yes, a couple hours ago, I'm on the north end of the security perimeter outside Pfizer Forum. You can hear the helicopters overhead. And about 0.7 miles northwest of where the perimeter shuts down, several police officers with the Columbus, Ohio Police Department out there shot and killed a man. We're told it had nothing to do necessarily with the RNC, but it's not that far away from the security perimeter, of course, and it involves officers in town, not from the Milwaukee Police Department. So it's been kind of a heightened security issue out there just a few blocks away from the RNC. Obviously, everyone keeping very close tabs on it. I've heard that a lot of people are out there protesting, and it's kind of a dicey situation through the course of the rest of the night. So we'll keep tabs on that going forward, of course.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jason. Now, Tim, let's talk about voters in North Carolina. There'll be a lot of talk tonight about crime and about immigration. Is that going to directly resonate with folks down there?
Carolina, I think across the country, the big discussion on this has been related to the fentanyl crisis, too. You know, our gubernatorial race, the current attorney general is running for governor. He's, you know, played a big role in trying to reduce particular opioid crisis several years ago, which had gotten really, you know, in a pretty good position until COVID hit, and then the rates went and spiked back up. But, you know, this crisis has affected families all over the place. We're going to hear some stories on the floor of the convention tonight. Our attorney general's race is really unusual. There's two members of Congress, sitting members of Congress, running for state attorney general. It's already been a huge issue on that, both what's the state's role should be on immigration, but also the fentanyl crisis. There's been a bill in North Carolina that they've been pushing for a few years now about forcing sheriffs to help the federal government with ICE issues, and that has not been passed yet, but it's been a big issue. I'm also curious about what we might hear tonight, just going back to what we heard from Texas, you know, about removing everyone from this country illegally that came under Joe Biden. I'm curious what they want to do with the people that came over illegally when Donald Trump was president, and also some specifics about how it would look like removing millions of people. Just logistically, like realistically, what would that look like if that was attempted? I think that's important in the conversation tonight about how that would even be feasible.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And Tim, let's talk a little bit of politics. We're going to hear from a former presidential candidate. Nikki Haley will be addressing the convention tonight. She, of course, was a fierce critic of Donald Trump during the campaign. She later changed her mind and says that she intends to vote for Trump. But there were still a sizable number of voters who were supporting her, even when it was clear that she would not be the nominee. I want to play a little bit about what a little of what she said when she dropped out. This was back in March, and then we'll talk about it.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those, and I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing.
Okay, so that made it sound like there was one more deal to be cut to really get her full support and that of her backers. Do you expect to hear anything along those lines tonight?
Yeah, I don't know. And what I'm really curious about with these folks that we're talking about that voted for Nikki Haley, are they hardcore Nikki Haley supporters and that they'll follow whatever she says? Or are they just protest votes and they don't really necessarily care about Nikki Haley? They were just voting against Donald Trump. And will they just stay home in the election or will they follow her and go to Donald Trump? If they go to Donald Trump, it's obviously a very big deal. And so, I mean, look, she wasn't even supposed to be here today. I was there back in 2016 when she endorsed Marco Rubio for president in South Carolina. And so just the juxtaposition of 8 years and where we are tonight in the speech tonight, it's just another remarkable moment in Republican history. But I am very curious to what she's going to say and just how much she's going to come behind it. And she's going to address the fact that she wasn't even supposed to be there tonight.
Yeah, no, you are indeed correct. I can't wait to hear what she has to say and how it's going to be received. Thank you for that, Tim. Let's go back to the floor where Rena Diamante is talking with some delegates. Rena.
It doesn't end there. Biden let Iran and Venezuela export their oil.
Hey, Errol, I've moved over to the New York delegation where obviously the Texas governor, the Republican governor there, has bused migrants to New York City. And I'm speaking with Sultan, who's chair of the Harlem GOP.
That is correct.
Yes, and a New York delegate, blaming Governor Abbott for sending those migrants to your community.
The unfortunate thing is with sanctuary cities, they had to spread the wealth. You're talking about another state, Texas, that has a lower quality of education, no Spanish-speaking teachers in many cities. They've had to reduce after-school sports, and they've had to cut tons of budgetary items. So they said spread the wealth. Well, now the challenge is that New York set this sanctuary guideline. If they didn't have this guideline, we wouldn't have this problem. But Eric Adams has done things like hand $65 million to Mokify, a startup, to hand unbranded debit cards out to illegals when we can't get the same level of service for single moms and black and brown folks that are facing recidivism or really are just impoverished inside of our communities.
And why will the Trump-Vance ticket, in your view, address some of those concerns?
What it comes down to is three. If you fund the police, you fund the police athletic leagues, you fund all our summer programs, you fund a lot of the things that give our kids an opportunity to be off of the streets. The gangs can't go and recruit them. The second thing is that if we have more investment inside of like the education to get kids into the training for these types of jobs, they can look at something that's not just working at the MTA or, you know, maybe like a minimum wage job. And the third piece of this is very simply put that they can afford housing, okay? Like SAFE builds into jobs, builds into housing. And that is a big thing for our communities because we're getting gentrified to death.
What makes you think that that President Trump, the former President Trump, will be able to facilitate those investments?
He's put together a very simple platform. It's the platform we voted on at the beginning of this convention on Monday. It's about safety to housing and an investment into job force development. And if we're able to do things where people like Governor Hochul is actually able to bring money down and isn't stopping it, meaning that we actually go through a lot of your administrative departments to bring that money into Harlem, into Brooklyn, into Queens, into the Bronx, we can actually do something. But last time, all this money got stuck in Albany. We petitioned for this. We filed tons of grant applications, and we got this much, okay?
Sultan, thank you so much for chatting with us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And so there you have it, the feelings of frustration from some New York delegates when it comes to not only the Biden administration, but certainly the Hochul administration in the state of New York. And so that's just something that we've been hearing, and we're going to move around and chat with some more delegates, especially with Safe Again, which talking to a lot of these delegates represents a number of things, which is support for law enforcement, reducing crime in their communities, and addressing border security and immigration. Errol.
Okay, thanks very much, Rena. We'll check in with you a little bit later. Josh Robin, some final thoughts in our last couple of minutes here. What's your sense of how this is going to play? And in other words, they've really set it up to say that making America safe also means mass deportation and dealing with border security. That really sets up the issue in a particular way.
It does, and it's incumbent upon us, as much as we can, to ask the candidates the questions about, as Tim was talking about, the feasibility of all of this. How are you going to deport millions of individuals? Are you going to separate those who came here 20 years ago to those who came here within 3 years ago? Are you going to separate a family from a child who was born here, a spouse born here, one not? Additionally, you know, this is an indictment of the entire system. I'm not trying to be politically correct, but I don't know how accurate it is to call them illegal, because they really tried coming here using an asylum process that I think many people would say needs vast changes. They are, you know, taking advantage of a process that is really, I think you could argue, broken. I think it's red meat for the crowd here. I think there's a lot of concern even on the other side as well. It's a difficult situation. I'm not sure Biden is getting too much credit for the situation seeming to improve there. But Biden is a very flawed candidate right now. We'll have to see if he can change around that situation. That's a topic, I think, Errol, for another day.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly be watching to see how all of this plays out. These are big issues.